Hello, and welcome to Family Business Essential Family Governance 201 webinar. This is one of 6 that we have designed, and we are delighted that you're able to watch this at your own time, share it with your family, and hopefully discuss some of the issues that we think are extremely important if you are running and building a family business legacy. The idea with family governance is to look at what are the issues that a family needs to think about and set up that match and balance and align with the business governance. Now, for any of you who have watched any of our work in the past, whether it's been in face-to-face workshops or on previous webinars, this diagram will be quite familiar to you, because in this one we outlay the differences and what they are and what they do. So if you look on the right-hand side, you have the classic business governance, and we have a separate webinar devoted to business governance. So I'm only going to skim this one in this webinar. So you've got the shareholders, you have got the directors that make up the board, and then you have different types of boards. Broadly, there are a board of directors, or you have an advisory board. Now, a lot of family businesses don't have any board. You actually do, because you have at least one director, and that is the board on that. And then, of course, your third layer in this business governance is the executive or the management. Now, in family business, rather uniquely, you might have the same person or people being shareholders, directors, and working in the business. Welcome to family business. So this business governance is important. I'll talk more in detail that on another webinar, but that is balanced by family governance. And there are 3 components broadly that make up the family governance. The first is a written document developed by the family called a family charter. And we spend a lot of time talking about this. We believe you need to be having something like a 40-year vision around what you want your family business to be doing, say for your great-granddaughter or grandson. And it's a set of agreed rules and guidelines the family has spent time developing and working on. It's a magnificent document, and the process of coming to it is wonderful. We get enormous pleasure working with families, taking them through this. Sometimes we might have 15, 16, sometimes 20 people in a room discussing these really, really important issues. And it includes a succession plan. And again, I'll talk about that shortly. But equally, it's often what are the guidelines and the rules for how the family deals with money, how the family deals with a crisis, the decisions that the families might want to be making and thinking about in regard to what is going on. And it's primarily at that family side. Now, the next level down is called the Family Council. And the Family Council is to the family what the board is to the business. And so these are the core family members, and they are making important decisions for the family, and they're also giving very clear direction to the board around what they want to happen with the business. So the Family Council knows what's going on with the investments, with the businesses. They know the numbers. There's a real high level of information and detail there. For some families, they then have a third area, which is what we call the Family Forum. And the Family Forum is a gathering of the entire family. And so this is mum, dad, kids, partners, young children. We've had one family forum where we had a couple of 3-month-old babies in. And it's a glorious, slightly chaotic meeting. Often it's a day or it's away somewhere nice so the whole family can get together. Now, they are really, really important because it's this family forum, and it really only meets once a year, that provides a real glue. And particularly when you're moving from 2nd to 3rd generation, which is, if you like, siblings to cousins, you need as much glue as you can. And the family forum is one of those really lovely ways of doing that. It builds family culture, family history, that sort of thing. Now, underneath that is succession plan, your estate planning around wills, what's the development of the next generation, all of that sort of thing. So for this webinar today, I'm talking about the family governance, and I'll be going into detail around this. And the business governance one, that's another webinar, and you can check that out on our YouTube site. So let's dive into this in a little bit of detail. The statistics of family businesses and succession. Now, to be very honest with you, These are slightly rubbery statistics. They've been around for a long time. There is some concern about just how valid they are. So don't take these numbers as gospel, but they give us a bit of an indication, right? So there are about 30% of family businesses make it from the first generation to the second generation. And that, if you like, is from, say, mum and dad who started it, passing it on to the sibling group. Right. Now that is, I actually think 30% is a little bit low, but I'll go with that as an indicator. Getting from the second generation to the third generation, only about 10% make that. Now, this is going from sibling to cousin. And the old saying in family business is that you go from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. So the first generation make it, the second generation build it, the third generation lose it. We actually, while those statistics are probably correct, it does not have to be the case. And so we put a lot of emphasis on, for those families who are doing that succession from second to third generation, there's a lot of work there. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit later. And I mentioned before, we need to find that glue for the cousin generation to be able to work together to keep building that family legacy. And it's whether it's family culture, sort of that awareness of the family, and being able to have enough independence, but also being part of something that is, pretty amazing. And it is pretty amazing when it's done well. And then to the fourth generation, they're saying about 3 to 4% make it to the fourth. In Australia and New Zealand, this is probably absolutely correct. There's not a lot of fourth or fifth or even sixth generation family businesses. There's a couple. But again, if you do the work in that first to second or possibly second to third generation, actually your chances of keeping that going are much, much better. And this is why this family governance is so utterly critical and is really central to so much of our work at Family Business Central. So the thing that you need to think about as a family, and particularly when you're talking about family governance, if you're developing a family charter or you're thinking about getting the family council together, is you need these 3 elements. And these can be challenging to any family business. And so every family has their culture. Some families are more private. They don't want to talk too much, or they don't like talking about money, for example. Some families are much more open. There's no right or wrong way on this. However, we do need to be able to balance the need for honest conversations, a level of transparency, and fairness. Now, let me go through these because these are really important. And I was just talking the other day about how we came across this. It was developed actually during a workshop that I was running. And the question was, what are the key things that a family business needs? And this ability to be honest or have the honest conversations, a level of transparency and fairness really popped out of that. And you can see in this diagram that underneath that and what emerges from this is trust. And this is the crucial ingredient. If we lose trust, then family members start looking at shareholder agreements, legal agreements, constitutions, that sort of thing, because they want to know what their vote is worth rather than actually having discussions. And so shareholders agreements and constitutions are all really important, but they're documents that you develop, you plan for the worst, you hope for the best, and you put them in the drawer. And the moment you find yourself reaching for those, there's something here around trust that is dropped. And so we want to try and build and maintain trust in the family. So let me talk about honesty for a moment. The family needs to be able to have honest conversations. In one example, we work very much on the basis of merit. If someone is coming into the business, they don't come into the business, say even particularly at a senior level, because they're family. They come in because they have the skills that are required. They might be family. They might get, maybe a little bit of extra special treatment, but actually they have to have the skills. It has to be on merit. They have to have the experience. And if you don't, then all sorts of mayhem can occur, and it can be crazy. So we know parents who were effectively too nice to their children, and they weren't honest enough to say particularly in one case I'm thinking of, to their daughter who wasn't ready to be the CEO. And she wanted to, they said, oh, okay, and there wasn't enough support there. And in fact, after a few years, it just turned into a complete disaster, and it cost many, many millions of dollars on that. Now, that level of honesty is hard. It's not easy to say no, particularly when your child wants something. But actually, that honest conversation is very, very important. Transparency is one that basically we say, if you don't have transparency, you have conspiracy theories. And again, families are different with their levels of transparency. Some families like to keep, most stuff, say, within the family council and not spread it out too much to the family forum. That is up to each family on this, but there needs to be a level of transparency. And this is the ability to have both the honest conversations where there is an appropriate level of transparency just takes a lot of the wind out of people's sails if they're getting upset about something. I remember we had a sibling was most worried about the pay rate of her brother, thinking it wasn't fair. I'll come to the fairness one on this. But there was a level of transparency where actually she could see that there was a merit-based, independently assessed salary for that brother, and it was completely appropriate. So that level of transparency just removed the potential arguments and so on that were starting to boil up. Now, the third area is fairness. And fairness is a juggle that every family, whether they're in business or not, have to really deal with. And so we're looking at perceptions of fairness. So it not only has to be fair, it has to be seen to be fair. And so and again, you can have something that the parents think is fair, but their children may not. And so it's often a discussion. It links with the honesty, it links with the transparency, and it's often a feeling. With family farms, for example, balancing fairness here is a real challenge, because often one family member wants to take on the farm, but not, and there's other siblings that may not want to, or not in the position to. But if that one sibling is taking on the farm, then often there's an enormous amount of effectively value and money that is gifted to that one sibling. And how do you balance that up? It is almost inherently unfair. We talk about fairness as feelings. It's not numbers per se. Numbers help at times, but in that particular case, if a sibling is effectively getting a, I don't know, $7 or $10 or $20 million farm, the numbers actually, you can't square those up. So we look at the emotional sides and what that might mean and how it can be done. Now, we have a background here at Family Business Central as negotiators, and so we work on a crucial thing called elegant currencies, and we use this as a way to balance up this feeling of fairness. And that particular example I was just talking about is based on a real example. The family was absolutely fine. The family realized the fact that it was fair. They were happy with the outcomes that we came to. But don't underestimate, particularly amongst sibling groups, that sense of, hang on, are they getting more than me? Is that fair or is that not fair? Right? That conversation is happening. I mean, it even happens in my own family at times. So it's one to just constantly be aware of. Now, family governance, as I said, is critical. As a family business, you are combining your two most precious things: your income, your career status, that sort of thing, with love and family, right? And you just cannot leave this to chance. It has to be actively managed. Otherwise, all sorts of pretty awful things can and do happen. What it does is it provides help or manages, I guess, that difference between what's happening with the cousin group and the sibling group, and starts providing frameworks. Then, because everybody's been involved in the development of these frameworks, they're much more likely to adhere to them, and so it helps enormously in that particular process. These rules and guidelines, they're not actually, well, most of them aren't legally binding. Shareholders agreement absolutely is, and constitutions are, but a lot in the family charter isn't. But the crucial thing is that they are emotionally binding, and because people have been genuinely listened to, genuinely had a seat at the table in the discussions as these were developed, the adherence to it is really very, very good. Family governance also makes sure that family is put first. And sometimes we see it the other way around, where the business comes first. And that's fine, but actually that has a real tendency to really start damaging family relationships. Again, you are combining love and money. And so you've got to be really careful, because you can have one successful and the other a complete disaster. And the costs, put aside the financial costs, are enormous. So you have to be very careful here. We also want to make sure that all family members are actually involved, and good family governance does this. It's unrealistic, well, especially once you start getting to sibling generation, particularly cousin generation, that all members of the family are going to be working in the business. Just because they're not working in the business, they are very much part of the family. And so we believe that if you're working in the business, you don't get any more special treatment than someone who's not working in the business. You get paid your salary, you might get your bonuses and all that sort of thing. So family governance is actually really also about helping maintain the whole family, whether you're involved in the business or otherwise. Okay. It is significant in reducing conflict, and the way we design, particularly family charters, is how do we head conflict off, or potential conflict that might be coming down the railway line, before it becomes a problem. And equally, it has a clause in there which talks about if there is conflict, and families do argue, how that gets resolved in some way. And ultimately, we're building a family legacy and a family culture. And it is an amazing opportunity where you get, sometimes 3 generations in a room talking about important, things like, what is our vision? What's our values? What is part of what makes up our culture? What defines us as a family? And these are beautiful, beautiful conversations, and incredibly important and helpful. And finally, you want to be thinking long term. I mentioned earlier, thinking 40 years in advance. Sometimes we've even asked longer than that. That's sobering enough, thinking 40 years. There's if there's a 20-year-old in the room and you go think 40 years, and they suddenly go, my goodness, I'll be 60, and I might have grandchildren. That for a 20-year-old, that is a bit of an interesting thought experiment. But it is important to be thinking that far ahead, because we want decisions that are made now to as much as possible to be valid in 40 years. Now, there's clearly going to be a bit of tweaking as you go on, but we really want to be thinking that far ahead. So, as I said earlier, you've got these 3 elements that come under the family governance structure: your family council, family form, family charter, or sometimes it's called a family constitution. Now, I'll go into a little bit of detail around this. So the family council. Family council is a regular meeting. It's usually twice a year, and sometimes you might need to call extraordinary meetings. And they are of what the family considers to be core family members. Now, we sort of jokingly say it's mum, dad, and the kids. But it can be defined by families in slightly different ways. Sometimes in-laws are involved. Sometimes in-laws aren't involved. But it's who are the core trusted members of the family who might be seen as the leaders of the family in that. And they're there to discuss really important family issues, and also what's going on with the business. But there are distinctions, and I'll bring those out shortly. As I said, it's usually mum, dad, and the kids, but whoever is core may include the in-laws. And the in-laws are really interesting. They're such an important part of families and family businesses. They often get a bad rap. But actually, and there's a lot of discussion. And again, families are different on this. What it provides, Family Council will get updates from the board, and members of the Family Council may be directors and be on the board. But again, it's a case of which hat are you wearing? And so when you're in the Family Council meeting, you are wearing your Family Council hat. When you're at a board meeting, you have a very different hat and a very different set of responsibilities. But the Family Council gets updates from the board, whether it's an advisory board or a board of directors, so that they can know what is actually happening there. Family council may be the ones that are looking after other investments that the family has. For some families, they move more into what we call the family office space, and it may be the family council that's doing those decisions around investments, or you might have a special investment council. Again, it just depends on what the family is doing. One of the key things a family council does is really aligning the family and the business, and particularly around the values and the vision. And so we often talk about the family council will provide the direction, and the board will provide the decisions. Now, that's an important distinction. I will cover that a little bit later as we go through here. Family council may be talking about, if they want to help support education, or possibly even funding of education for future generations. If someone in the family has particular needs, health issue or something like that, the family council is the place that kicks in and provides that or works out what's the best way to help. It's obviously the place where the next generation development kicks in. And so if you've got a big business and next generation want to have opportunities within that, the family council is the one who will look at, well, okay, what's the plan? What's the development plan for members of the next generation if they want to come into the business, particularly at a senior level? The family council may also be providing or agreeing to provide seed capital or other support if other family members have some really interesting business ideas and that sort of thing. We call it that innovation and entrepreneurial aspect. And this is just one of the most wonderful things that family businesses can do for families, which is provide these opportunities that they probably wouldn't get anywhere else. And there's all sorts of support that can be given, from knowledge to some free rent somewhere to branding support, all sorts of things that can really help someone who's got a great business idea, let that grow and flourish. Family philanthropy is a big one, and for a lot of families this is incredibly important, and often those decisions are made at the family council, and it engages the next generation, and so it both lives and breathes and talks about family culture, family values, the history, and you see that starting to happen in that, although to be honest a certain amount of that also happens in the family forum. So let's talk about family forum. Usually this is once a year. It doesn't have to be, it can be more often, but once you start getting large numbers in the family, 20, 30, 40 and more people, getting people together for once a year is enough of a struggle here. And it's a meeting. It usually has a bit of fun attached to it, a meal, something like that. But it's a chance, if you like, for the clan to gather on that. It involves everybody. All right. And as I said earlier, I've been facilitating a family forum, and there've been babies in there, and then there's been the grandparents and everyone in between. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Might involve a number of different social activities. It may also involve specific training. You might have media training brought in. You might have some communication skills training brought in, so that the family is aware of what's going on. And especially if it's high-profile family, sometimes the rest of the families members who may not be directly involved with the business might need to just know how to deal with situations if they arise. Probably one of its key things is building the culture and the legacy across the family. And again, as I said, when you move from sibling to cousins to then, the next lot of generations, this is really important. And it starts to answer the question, what does it mean to be in this family? Right? This is the glue, right, that it provides, and is very important. If you are intent on building a legacy, you need this glue. We don't want to be putting everybody into straitjackets. You'll have different families doing slightly different things, of course, but there's enough glue, enough identification with what it means to be part of this. Now, let me talk about the family charter / constitution. As I said, set of agreed ground rules on that. It covers what we call the business of family and the family business. And these are sort of technical terms, I guess, but the business of family. So this is all around what's happening with the family, what is going on, whether it's around money within the family, support within the family, the rules within the family. So that's the business of family. The other side is the family business, which are things like succession, succession of ownership, succession of leadership, succession of directorship, the rules around who comes into the business and what they need to be able to demonstrate or provide or know about, what skills and all that sort of thing. So there's two broad parts. Don't get too caught up. But it's not a bad way of thinking about it. The family charter includes a succession plan, and a lot of succession is often just done around numbers. And yes, numbers are important, but you actually need more. And it has to involve the feelings and the relationships and looking at what are the possibilities and what are the opportunities. And it's got to, the real challenge with the succession plan is managing the fairness. And so, the older generation might think that something is fair when the younger generation goes, it's not fair at all. And we've come across this a lot. And so really important discussions around, particularly if you're looking at ownership and how is that split across the next generation. And the emotions and feelings can run red hot. And it doesn't matter what the numbers say. If everybody is feeling like that is angry or frustrated, or they're saying this is unfair, you have a problem. And so succession is the numbers, as I said, are important, but it has to manage that feeling side of family businesses, and family businesses have a lot of strong feelings at times. If you're developing a family charter, sometimes the head of the family will head off and go and write it and then present it back and go, there you go, folks. Never works. Right? You could go and buy a family charter, detailed family charter right now, off the shelf, cut and paste, change the name, present it, and it's a complete waste of time and money. The best are ones where the family has sat down, sometimes for 3, 4, sometimes 5 days, and discusses it. Right? And at the end, yes, it's taken time. Yes, it has been expensive, but it's something that is genuinely owned by everybody in the family, and it has real meaning. And it is a superb process just to watch a family go through this. Okay, it does need to be reviewed. Yes, it's a living document, but every 5 or 10 years, things do occur. We think we've been doing this for a long time. We think we've covered most of the bases, but sometimes there's going to be stuff we've missed. And so that review is very, very important. And again, it means the whole family comes together and goes, okay, what do we do about this? What decisions do we want to make? A successful family charter, as I said, it's developed by the family. It's owned by the family. And it gets agreement, right, around what are we doing with this thing? All right. And again, it's that alignment between the family and the business. As businesses get bigger and more complex, and especially if they move into an IPO type of situation, this becomes more and more challenging at times. And less of the family are often working in the business, because you're running a very large business, you have to be very skilled. And so often families tend to take a bit more of a back seat. And this is part of the evolution. You might start off with a very small business, but over years, it might develop and grow into a very large business. So the agreement that you've got starts sort of looking at these possibilities and how you might be able to manage them going forward. It provides a real guide for future generations, and particularly around expectations, what it means to work in this business, what it means to be a family member working in the business, because you're always a role model as a family member. It doesn't matter what level you're at. People are watching you. They know your family. And so they're expecting to see special treatment for you. That is just a disaster. So again, the family charter will provide those sort of expectations. It brings the family close. We see this. We're able to resolve old conflicts. We're able to get old myths that have been creating problems, resolved, sorted, whatever it is. And we see this time and time again from that. And it's this effective set of bedrock agreements, right, that the family, because they've been part of it, are prepared to follow. And it reduces that risk of what we call family destroying conflict. When we have seen, unfortunately, where families have let either the business or money absolutely wreck the family relationships. And we write every year a blog in December called Don't Break the Christmas Dinner Rule. And it's a really important rule. You want to, you're going to have your arguments and your disagreements, but you want to keep them at a level where you can still sit around the table at the end of the year as a family and celebrate. All right, and there's your defining test with this, and a family charter is one of those key things that really helps with this. So the process, it allows families to have conversations that everybody wants to have but never gets around to it. But equally, it allows or enables, probably the better word, right, the conversations to happen that everyone knows they need to happen, but sort of want to avoid it. Right? And that's a lot of our work. We often have to raise the issues that everyone wants to, no, there's no pink elephant sitting in the corner of the room. And our job is to go, actually, we need to talk about it. And in fact, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. And often when it's sorted out, people just go, oh, thank goodness, wasn't that bad, right? And we move on. It really helps family members spot opportunities, whether this is for a new type of business, whether this is for a particular role in the business. We've seen family members change the course of their university degree. It's just a lovely thing. You sort of see their eyes wide open. They get some ideas. They go, wow, we can do this. It does address those areas of conflict and disagreement. Sometimes we can't immediately resolve those, but at least there's a plan. At least it has been started rather than just covered up in the corner and everyone hopes it just goes away, which of course it won't. It provides really good and clear succession planning that manages the financial side as well as the emotional and the family side. And when you're developing a succession plan, you've got to remember, always comes in three parts. Right? You've got succession of leadership. That's the one we often think about, right? Who's going to lead the shop? Who's going to be the CEO or the managing director, something like that? Then there's directorship. All right? Often family members are directors. You might have some external directors as well. But how does directorship get passed on to the next generation? Right? And again, you want things like the directors on a board. Preferably, you want more family members with directors on the board than non-family, because you want the family always to be in control. Now, there's ways and means around that, but this directorship is often the one that's forgotten, because often we think about just ownership. Right? Now, ownership is tricky enough as it is, and often it gets very complex because you might have shares held in trusts and who are the beneficiaries of those trusts and who's the appointors and all that sort of thing. And often when we start talking about this with families, their eyes glaze over and they clearly want to go to sleep. It is important that they get their head around it and that there is that sense of, yes, we know what's going on. Now, inevitably, they'll forget the details, but as long as we've got, there's that enough sense of, yes, I know what's going to happen. And that legally it's under control. And this is where some of the legal documents come in. This might be shareholders' agreements, could be part of the Constitution. And that's where we'll sometimes get good legal advice, good financial advice, to manage it. But this is the three parts of your succession plan. Now, with family succession, you do need high levels of transparency. If the family thinks that there have been side deals done or special things done for other people that's not include everybody else, you have real problems on your hands. And this is the problem. Sometimes, alas, parents play favorites, right? And you can't in this one. Merit. That's why we focus on merit all the time around that. You want to think through succession as early as you can. The earlier the better, both in terms of money and damaged relationships and time and effort, all that sort of thing. And as things move on, you might have a succession plan in place. It may need to be adapted. That's okay. You've got a plan in place. I mean, we've had, I remember I was at a conference and there was a guy running this huge farm in his late 70s, and he said, what about succession? And he went, well, we'll get around to that at some point. Yeah, it's pushing it, right? The earlier we can think about this, the better. Succession has to be not only fair, but seem to be fair. So here's the fairness thing. Not only the numbers have to add up, but it's got to feel right. And that takes a lot of discussion at times. As I said, it has to manage the financial as well as the emotional issues, and it's got to be written down. Do not rely on memories. It will not work. Right? And the most obvious place is it goes into the family charter so that people can see it and they can refer to it. It can be updated when necessary. It's all there. So let me summarize a little bit here. Family governance, it needs to be developed and owned and run by the family. You need to have, I said, solid and robust, actually need to have honest conversations, right? People feel like they've been heard. They may not be agreed with it, but they've been heard, their ideas have been considered. Now, let me just add a little bit in here. A family is not a democracy. There are some things that the senior generation, only the senior generation, can make decisions about. And so, you might have the grandparents, if they're still involved, they have to, their wishes are really important. And we often start with them and go, what do you want? This is your legacies that you're building. What do you want here? And so we start with them and what that means and how that works. And there are some decisions that only they can make. And then once we've got those in place, then we can get other people involved. And some of those conversations, to be honest with you, are tricky, but they do need to be addressed. Don't strive for perfection. All right. The family charter is a living document. It will be adapted. Try something, see how it goes. We did a family charter with the family where we couldn't do anything around succession of ownership. It just was not possible, and for all sorts of different reasons. We did the entire rest of the family charter. We've waited for 6 years, and they are now able to get around to the succession side of things. So it certainly wasn't perfect, but it gave them enough to get moving and allowed them to, and finally insert the succession of ownership into it. Take time. This doesn't have to be done tomorrow, and in fact, it shouldn't be. We usually meet with families one day every 3 or 4 weeks. They need time to think about it, to digest it, and we'll go back over the decisions they've made from the previous meeting and then get onto the new ones. And it does need time. And again, as long as you're not, someone is not dying or something awful like that, you take the time. You want these things to be thought through well. And take your thoughts forward 40 years, right? Decisions that you make now, we'd want them to be pretty relevant, sort of 90% relevant for the next generations, because you don't want to have to redo succession every single generation. It just becomes exhausting. It's unnecessary, right? Remember, it certainly might need to be some tweaking, but not wholesale redoing it every time. So as you can see, this is normally a webinar where we have people listening. So we haven't got any time for Q&A. We haven't got any opportunity for Q&A. I hope you have enjoyed this. Please let us know if you've got any questions. Fire us an email or put any comments down below. We're delighted to hear from you and hope that this has been a useful webinar for you. I look forward to catching up soon. Bye for now.